our findings reveal that leaders provide extensive or highly extensive guidance to their content teams in areas like research design. 91% of them, they actually do this. Why does this matter? Because research design is where you plant the seeds for groundbreaking insights.
Having been a program leader at Cognizant, I could not survive without having process rigor across the whole thought leadership, content development, and marketing continuum. I would have failed miserably if I did not have process rigor.
Our next episode of Everything Thought Leadership is about a study that we recently completed more than a year after kicking the topic around. It's the 11th study on thought leadership that I have led since 2007, and it's also the most revealing one. This is the first study that I know of that has dived deeply into the practice of thought leadership in the global IT services industry, the biggest sector in the $5.4 trillion industry of information technology. In this episode of Everything Thought Leadership, my research colleagues and I discuss why we did the research, how we did it, our biggest and most surprising findings, and more importantly, what our findings mean for IT services firms that want to raise their game in thought leadership. Guys, great to have you here on episode 51 of Everything Thought Leadership. We've been working on a study for, and I checked my records, for over a year. We actually began to look at this topic back in November of 2024. So here we are today. We've released findings last month, and now we're bringing it to the marketplace. And this is another way we're doing it. So first of 4 questions here that we will dive into. First, why did we do this research? Who wants to start? How about you, Alan?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. It's something that's been on my mind for many years. And it's been clear to me since I joined Cognizant, which is a global leading IT services vendor back in early 2007, that as a recovering journalist, that thought leadership, or at least what was called thought leadership in the industry, was really an underappreciated discipline. And many firms, in my view, and I spent a lot of time looking at it, paid lip service to thought leadership. But they treated it like a checklist item. They saw their competitors publishing material on topics that were important to them, and they believed they needed to have something to say to remain relevant and top of mind to their targets. But as a result, I think they really underinvested and delivered substandard thought leadership assets. They didn't really embark on building a solid, rigorous research base. In my travels, I found that only IT services firms with a management consulting pedigree, like Accenture and Deloitte and PwC to some degree, took a more elevated thought leadership research-based track. They fielded thought leadership initiatives that delivered fact and evidence-based reports. Others, it seemed to me, outsourced their thinking to analyst firms or believed that thought leadership wasn't as important as advertising or other branding initiatives that were tied to sporting events and industry conferences. And that really didn't change over my 15 years in the industry. I was fortunate, though, that during my time at Cognizant, we were given the latitude and the resources to develop a high-value thought leadership program. In fact, in my humble view, thought leadership was instrumental to helping propel Cognizant's revenue trajectory. The firm grew from $2 billion when I joined to $16 billion in revenue when I left 15 years later. Now, again, not all of that is attributable to thought leadership, but it was a major contributing factor to both revenue growth and recognition by clients, the media, and other influences of the firm's industry leadership. Again, I was fortunate Cognizant's management, particularly Senior Vice President of Marketing and Strategy, Malcolm Frank, and the CEO, Frank D'Souza, they firmly believed that thought leadership was critical to distinguishing our firm from the growing herds of competitors in the highly competitive and congested global IT services space. In fact, both of those leaders were quite involved in both creating thought leadership and disseminating it to clients. In fact, Frank D'Souza would send personal letters to those clients on engagements that he served as the executive sponsor, explaining how our thought leadership applied to their business circumstances.
So let's revisit this, because one of the biggest things I've heard is at the time you had a CEO, Frank D'Souza, and you had a head of strategy and marketing, Malcolm Frank, who were full-on advocates of thought leadership. And that was important. And I think we don't see a lot of that, even today. So let's revisit that in just a bit. Let me turn to Manny for a second. Manny, why did we do this research in your mind?
Yeah, sure. So just to add to, what Ellen was saying, during our time at Cognizant, we saw firsthand how powerful thought leadership could lead to opening doors with the clients and prospects. So I remember this one instance, one study that we did. We had published a major research study on the future of work, the work ahead. And it was data heavy based on surveys of thousands of executives exploring, how digital transformation was reshaping job roles and organizational structures. So we weren't just talking about technology, we were talking about the human side of transformation, which was extremely important. And that particular aspect really resonated deeply with the C-suite executives who were grappling, with these changes in their own companies. So that is the magic of thought leadership, if done right. It's not a sales pitch. It's not a, brochure. It's not a product brochure or the marketing material. It's a door opener, for you as an organization with C-suite, with C-level executives. So we had this massive question, that was going over our head in a world where clients have more choice than ever, where everyone sounds the same. If you look at almost every IT services firm today, their messaging is more or less the same. For instance, we can help you use AI to engineer digital superiority, and we are the most innovative partners. So more or less, every vendor has the same messages. So what we really wanted to understand how the best firms actually stand out and what are they doing differently? And specifically, what role does thought leadership play in that? And that's what drove us to, dig deep to this, particular paper that we publish. So we wanted to understand not just whether thought leadership mattered, but how the firms that are winning with it do things differently. And that's exactly is the whole premise of why we did this, research.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. Those were reasons I thought this would be a great research topic. Another one was that, until we did a ton of secondary research, we didn't know this, or at least I didn't know this, but IT services is the largest sector in the $5.4 trillion global IT sector. It's now the largest sector. Telecom used to be as of 3 or 4 years ago. Now it's IT services. And to me, that says there's a need to use thought leadership as the lever for differentiation. The need is just great. Lots of companies are spending lots of money on the Accentures and the Cognizants and the Virtusas and the IBMs and the Infosys of the world. And it's getting harder to tell them apart because with all this spending, all sorts of IT services companies have jumped into the fray, existing and new ones, right? And it's not that hard to stand up a new IT services company today. All you need is an internet connection and people who are willing to work out of their homes. You don't even need an office. The amount of competition in IT services is deafening. And I think it's inherently harder than it is, say, for management consulting firms or the pure technology firms. It's harder for IT services firms to differentiate themselves because to some degree, at the end of the day, they implement the technology firm's products, and they often follow on the heels of the management consultants who say, here's how we're going to re-engineer the marketing process. So it's harder, I think, for IT services firms to distinguish themselves on the back of thought leadership. But we all have learned, and I think we've known for a long time, it is possible, and when it happens, good things happen to that firm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The mindset of most of the IT services firms is that they are implementers, they're tacticians, they're not strategic thinkers. And in a market where it's defined by a lot of sameness and blandness of marketing message and positioning, thought leadership is one great way to differentiate your unique expertise.
So if you're one of, dozens of IT services firms that can implement Salesforce or ServiceNow, and you're not looked upon as being an expert in some domain of Salesforce implementations, you're competing essentially on what? Price and maybe some good client referrals, but that means you got to get your price down. Being seen as a commodity is not a good place to be, especially as more commodity options are available.
A year ago, when we were brainstorming, should we do this research or why do we need to do this research? I think we were on the same page in terms of the mindset shift, that is very much required in the industry. At the end of the day, you're delivering services, right? And what has to do with thought leadership? What do you need to become a thought leader? You're just delivering a technical aspect to organizations. So I think that's where we really started to understand, the mind shift is the biggest challenge as well as the opportunity for these firms. And if they get it right, and this is what we have proved through the study also, and that was the initial hypothesis, right? If leaders, companies that are winning with thought leadership, they are not only creating the brand value, but they're also generating the new revenue sources, right? So definitely there is a clear business case, the business outcomes that is there for organizations.
That's right. And we explicitly defined the leaders as those who said thought leadership is driving a lot of revenue, and the followers as those who said thought leadership is not driving any revenue. Let's talk about how we did the research. Manny, you're a researcher by heart. Why don't you talk about how we approach this from a research perspective?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, let's talk how we actually approach this entire exercise. We knew from the start that we couldn't just survey one side of the equation. So we designed a complete study in terms of a two-sided way of looking at the entire market to see if the sellers and the buyers of IT services were actually on the same page or not. So what we did, we fielded two major surveys, this spring. The first one went out to 300 IT services firms around the world. We asked them questions about everything, in terms of how much they spend on thought leadership, who controls the budget, and what processes they use when it comes to thought leadership, and how they measure the success. Are there any specific KPIs? And where exactly generative AI, fits in. So we really wanted to understand the mechanics of running thought leadership, right, in organizations, in IT services firms. And then in parallel, right, the second survey went to 200 executives across 11 industries: banking, insurance, retail, life sciences, you name it. We covered almost all the industries. And these weren't the junior folks, they were the people making the decisions on which IT services firms to hire, to use, basically. So we asked them what influences their buying decisions. How much time do they spend reading thought leadership content, that is coming from these IT services firms, and what formats they actually prefer. And here's where it got really interesting. We found a small group, and Bob, you have already highlighted, the leaders and the followers. About 12% of what we call them the leaders. So these are the IT services firms we found. They told us that their thought leadership drives revenue. That is the bottom line. And then we had the followers, the 16% who said they get zero revenue of it. So that gave us a very clear indication, the incredible ability to compare extremes and see what separates the winners from the followers. So that was the whole premise, and that's how we executed this entire study.
Yeah, and Manny, I think one of the many good things we did in the research design is we took the same question, as you know, and we asked it both on the sell side, the IT services companies, and on the buy side, the clients. And that
absolutely
right. That question was, out of 9 criteria, where does thought leadership from an IT services firm? How influential is that in your decision to use this IT services firm or that one? So we asked the same question, right? And the results there were pretty eye-opening.
Absolutely.
So if we hadn't asked the buyers, the buy side, that same question, we hadn't surveyed buyers at all, do you think this research would have been, as we're biased, of course, interesting as it turned out to be?
Yeah, it could have been. No, you're absolutely right, Bob. It could have been a very sort of a one-sided approach, right? What IT services firms are telling us in terms of their approach to thought leadership and value they give to this entire thought leadership agenda, unless we have spoken to the buyer side, how important thought leadership is for the enterprise buyers at the end of the day. Do they really value thought leadership? And that is one of the prominent findings from this entire research that we really found the value that enterprise buyers place on thought leadership, the content that they're consuming that is coming from IT services firms. So that was one of the biggest findings. And that sort of provided a baseline in terms of what exactly IT services firms need to do to make sure that they have not only the required mind share, but how to convert that mind share into market shift.
And that finding, that the buyers of IT services firms, I mean, the ones who purchase their services, I'm not talking about private equity buyers, about the Fords and the Toyotas and the other big companies that bring in IT services firms by the droves, they value thought leadership from IT services firms more than the IT services firms value thought leadership in deciding which IT services firms to use. That, I think, has led to a lot of head scratching on our parts as to why is that the case? Why is that the case? So, Alan, you kind of led the qualitative research. Why don't you talk about why we did that and what we did?
Well, I mean, while the quant told us a lot about the state of thought leadership from both the sell and buy side of IT services, we realized that the hard data only kind of scratched the surface to some degree. It revealed a good chunk of the story, but needed more color, and qualitative interviews allow you to do that, as well as to understand, best practices from the industry perspective. So we conducted interviews with roughly 19 individuals from a variety of POVs, thought leadership program leaders, execs who oversee the marketing of thought leadership content at firms such as Accenture, Capgemini, Cognizant, the IBM Institute for Business Value, TCS, and Virtusa. We spoke with former industry leaders such as Malcolm Frank at Cognizant and Ben Pring, who held key thought leadership roles at Cognizant and at Gartner. And Vinny Merchandani, a former Gartner analyst, author, and IT services and software intermediary, who over the years has helped buy-side executives make informed technology procurement decisions on IT services and software. And we also spoke with a bunch of folks who came from the buy-side themselves. They were really able to give us a real interesting window into what their thinking was in terms of how they use thought leadership, how thought leadership helped them to determine who was the best partner of choice. And lastly, we spoke to financiers of IT services firms, such as folks at Recognized Partner and Tercera, which are both financiers of IT services companies. And we spoke to them a lot about what they saw in terms of how thought leadership helped to differentiate companies in their portfolio, in terms of having great, timely, and differentiated thought leadership, and how it really helped them to stand out from the bland and vague marketing and positioning that dominates the space. We asked questions of the sell-side folks, such as how much content they receive every week from companies that are trying to demonstrate their expertise in the IT services area. What percentage of this content do they read on average? What percentage of the content that they read do they believe is of high quality? And how important high quality content is in helping them and their company address key issues that they're facing. We asked the IT services companies how much thought leadership content their firm produces each year, just to get a sense how important it was to them, and whether their firm really assessed the impact of thought leadership on business activities. Does their company use thought leadership research to spur product or service innovation? And how involved their senior management gets in the thought leadership process from ideation through publication and measurement. And lastly, the big question, of course, the question of the hour, which is whether their firm is using generative AI in any portion of their thought leadership development, execution, and marketing process. A lot more was there, but that kind of got us to the point where we could have some interesting color and context for the quant that we had acquired.
Yeah, I thought some of the interviews, all the interviews were interesting on different aspects of this issue. Although our interviews, I think we would say our interviews with the heads of thought leadership we're interviewing people who are at the top of their game and whose companies largely get thought leadership. So we're not, in terms of our survey, we're interviewing people at leader organizations in thought leadership, not at laggard follower organizations.
Yeah.
So
it helped us to get some best practices to understand really what differentiates where the rubber meets the road, a leader from a follower.
So let's move on to the third question here. What do you guys think were our three biggest findings? I'm going to let Manny take the lead on this. Name the biggest finding for you.
I think there were so many good findings, to be honest, right? Difficult to pick one. But if I were to pick one, honestly, which sort of blew my mind also, that was the massive gap in talent and research rigor between leaders and followers. When we asked firms to rate their content development talent, 78% of leaders said that they were talent rich or they had sufficient talent, they were talent abundant. And when we asked the same question to followers, it was only 13%. So that's a 6-to-1 advantage leaders have when it comes to talent. And it's also about how they develop content. We ask firms to describe their research processes, and nearly 70% of leaders have a rigorous or very rigorous process, very extensive one, and they don't take it lightly at all. So just think about detailed, research design, quality criteria, and structured narratives. And the same thing, when it goes to followers, only 34% of followers, right, they can say that they are confident about their research processes. And on top of that, our findings also revealed that leaders provide extensive or highly extensive guidance to their content teams in areas like research design. And 91% of them, they actually do this. And why does this matter? Just think about it. Because research design is where you plant the seeds for groundbreaking insights. And if you don't get it right, then obviously there's going to be a problem. You don't get your topic properly, formulate strong hypotheses, choose the right methods, you are going to end up with very superficial findings that don't move the needle. And lastly, what skill that leaders say they need to improve the most? And what we found very interesting, leaders said it's about marketing and distributing their content. And which skills do followers need to improve the most? That was about developing unique perspectives. So that tells you everything. Leaders have the insights dialed in. They know that they are picking the right topics, which is going to resonate with their audience. And all they need is just to get better at amplifying them. Whereas followers are still struggling to create compelling ideas in the first place. So that tells the entire story, how exactly leaders are winning this game, not only in terms of investments, but in terms of entire research design, in terms of talent and the skill set, right, which is extremely important to them.
Yeah, Mandy, you mentioned research design as being a key part of it, and you guys have heard this from me. By the way, we spent about 4 months on research design for this study.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I tell people research design is the step in which big ideas are, begin or big ideas are killed.
Absolutely.
And you don't do research design well, doesn't matter what data you collect, you're not likely to come up with a groundbreaking insight, even one. So, Alan, what was your most important and most surprising finding?
It's funny because, Manny, I was going to say the exact same thing. Having been a program leader, having been a program leader at Cognizant, I could not survive without having process rigor across the whole thought leadership, content development, and marketing continuum. I would have failed miserably if I did not have process rigor. So I'm not going to repeat what you had said. I'm just going to amplify it in a couple of different areas. You talked about marketing. I was going to focus also on how folks are using generative AI. It seemed somewhat counterintuitive to me that leader firms are more selective than followers in where they use generative AI in producing content. While nearly half of the leaders, I think it was 47%, use AI to gather and summarize secondary research, less than a third use it in other content development tasks, such as identifying topics, creating insights, outlining narratives, and writing and editing prose. Follower firms are more likely than leader firms to use generative AI in all but 9 of the content development tasks that we asked them about. So I was thinking, why would that be the case? And maybe it's an obvious no-brainer, but perhaps the follower firms need more help than the leaders, and they see generative AI as a means for accelerating the thought leadership development process and keeping pace with the leaders who have more resources to deploy and to use in all aspects of thought leadership. But again, my view, and I'm sure shared by others on this panel, as well as people who are very up to date on what's going on in generative AI, I think that you need to use it responsibly. You need to check facts and assertions. I mean, that's critical. You have to know if your model is pulling knowledge from publicly available sources. And it's critical that you give credit where credit is due. Sometimes I find that when I'm using generative AI, it's pulling stuff, it's calling it research reports. And when I go look at the source, it's just somebody's opinion. You just have to be very careful, because otherwise you could end up sabotaging what appears on the surface to be groundbreaking thought leadership.
To me, the most interesting and surprising finding, this was on the buyer side, what the decision criteria are bringing in an IT services firm. And so it was that thought leadership from IT services firms finished third in importance in buyers' buying decision, buying criteria. Aftermarket reputation, why the IT services firms need great marketing, great brand marketing especially, and just following customer case studies and testimonials. No secret as to why that's important. So buyers rated thought leadership third on their criteria, and that was way above price, right, which finished at the bottom of our list of 9 criteria that we offered buyers. And it was above what the IT analyst firms say about IT services firms, the ratings from Gartner, Forrester, and others. And it's not to say that the IT analyst firm ratings are unimportant. We didn't find that at all. 69% of the client executives that we surveyed said the ratings of the IT analyst firms were highly influential or very highly influential. But that's still 10 percentage points less than said thought leadership was highly influential or very highly influential. And so, that to me was a revelation. I did not expect thought leadership to rank high in terms of buying criteria on the part of the buyers of IT services. I did not expect that at all. I expected IT services firms to say, no, it's low on buyers' criteria, but I didn't expect buyers to say it was high.
The key message, for IT services firms is if you're competing on price, sooner or later, you are going to lose the game, right? It's better that you sort of figure out how to gain the mind share first, right, with your clients and prospects. And for that, thought leadership is going to play a critical role. If you are undervaluing it, it's time that you get it right, because sooner or later, if you're competing on price, you will lose the game.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go.
Race to the bottom. Yeah.
Race to the bottom. Let's go to the fourth and final question here. What do we think are the 3 most important things that IT services firms need to do if they read the report or they already believe that we have to ratchet up our thought leadership game? What are the 3 most important things from our research that they should think about doing? Why don't we start with Manny?
Yeah, sure. I would say, invest in primary research and do it with rigor, because this is what the findings tell us. We found that the firms that are winning, they are spending 57% of their content budget on research-based, research-backed content. And the firms that are losing, they only spend only 28% of their budget in primary research. And that's a massive difference. I don't mean, ghostwriting a white paper based on, 1 or 2 interviews or research or referring to third-party articles. I mean actual studies, right? Quantitative surveys, qualitative ones, best practice case study interviews, the kind of stuff that uncovers patterns across dozens or hundreds of companies. And why is research-backed thought leadership important? Because this is what enterprise buyers told us. They told us, when we asked buyers of IT services what they valued in thought leadership content, the top 3 attributes were relevance, statistical evidence from surveys, and case study evidence. So they want to see the data. They want to see the real examples of how companies like theirs, they are, solving problems. And if you want to break through the noise, if you want to open doors to the C-suite, you need insights that are backed by evidence. And you need to be able to say, we surveyed 500 executives, and here's what we found. That's the currency in today's market. And that's my recommendation. Invest in primary research. Don't look for just generic articles or the content that you can easily develop through ChatGPT or other platforms. You really need to invest in the authentic, the pure thought leadership, which is going to be backed with your research data.
So are we saying then, guys, that buyers don't buy unproven theory?
Because everybody else is saying the same thing, right? You don't have evidence to prove it. Or you're going to rely on third-party articles or third-party case studies or third-party surveys, right? This company said this, that's where we are saying it. You really need to sort of, step up, right? And say that you want this data, the amount, the efforts and the money in creating this survey database. And these are some of the prominent findings based on what clients and prospects are telling us. And I'm sure, the buyers, right, would really appreciate it because they really want to see the industry on the problems.
Yeah, because, some of the advice in thought leadership studies from IT services firms, if the buyer is to follow the advice, these can be multi-million dollar, these can be 7 and 8 figure decisions.
Absolutely.
Buying new technology and bringing in IT services firms, a consulting firm, in training their people after the initiative is over. These can be consequential decisions that can make or break careers or make or break whole companies. So, when I say theory without evidence is interesting theory, and that's about it. So, Alan, what do you think is the most important learning here?
Again, Manny, maybe you and I come from the same background, but I was going to say the imperative to do really quality research-based thought leadership and the high bar for really building and disseminating quality deep dive case studies are really important. But I'm going to touch again on what I was talking about, having top management support. And this was backed up by our research that having strong management support really fuels the thought leadership programs at leading firms. In fact, 83% of the leader firms said that their top management views thought leadership as a competitive advantage. And this compared to 30% of follower firms, those who said thought leadership contributed minimally to revenue growth or not at all. And, again, in my experience, having that top-down support, it allows you to open doors to the subject matter experts in the organization. It allows you to get interviews with some of the leading clients and prospects, and ultimately to do a better job with your program. Now, getting that support isn't very easy, of course. There are numerous obstacles you have to overcome. You've got, cynicism and skeptical senior leaders who say, I'm from Missouri, prove it to me that thought leadership really can develop and deliver return on investment. Now, as we all know, it takes time. It's not a cause and effect thing. It's kind of a contributor to both the revenue and recognition in the marketplace. But, being able to really cut through all that and be able to show that thought leadership can influence buying decisions and help to inform great product and service innovation, these are critical. And I always, when I speak to my peers and colleagues still in the industry, I said, if you can't solve that one, you're going to be in for tough sledding.
Yeah, because you can do a big study and have a groundbreaking result, big insights. But if the sales force won't, open doors with it, or if the CEO won't acknowledge it, if the top management team won't take it to market in conference presentations, you have a nice intellectual asset that you can put on a shelf like this, basically.
It takes a village to really make this work. Absolutely.
It really does. And so one of the pieces of advice I give lots of companies over the years is if your top management team is skeptical about the impact of thought leadership, create a piece of thought leadership with the CEO. Make sure it's good. Do great primary research. Make sure you come up with a counterintuitive finding and you have the case examples that prove your novel solution. and have the CEO kind of be the front person in taking it to market. Until the CEO sees how it can open doors for him personally, and what kind of market reaction he gets overall, he or she won't believe what thought leadership can do. But when you put them in that position and the light bulbs go off, imagine this is what happened to Frank D'Souza in the days he ran Cognizant, and I've seen it in other places. Make your CEO a thought leader on something. All right, guys, anything else that we haven't discussed here that we think is super important to remember about the study?
I think we covered all the highlights, but I would just strongly suggest that people read this report. It's long, but it's deep, and it's got lots of prescriptions, and I think that it's must reading for people in the industry, as well as for folks who are buyers of IT services, to really understand what makes the IT services industry tick or not deliver on their promises.
How about you, Manny?
I would say, we can spend hours going through the findings, right? Because we have got enormous set of findings, both from these IT services firms as well as from buyers. And if you are really serious if you're a vendor and really serious about your business, this is the report for you. And what is the best thing we have done? I'm not sort of doing a self-marketing, but we're just trying to help IT services firm. There is a 2-minute self-assessment tool that we have developed. All you need to do is go to the site, take the self-assessment, and see where exactly you stand, okay, when it comes to the leaders versus followers. Are you a leader or you a follower? If you need any help, feel free to reach out to us, right? Bob, Ellen, and I will be happy to support you guys. But definitely, for whether you are a small or a big IT services firm, this is the report for you.
And we would say that recommendations on thought leadership apply to IT services firms of any size, right? I mean, I think the impression...
Absolutely.
You need the impression to be, we need the resources of Accenture or IBM, to do anything beneficial. We know that's not the case, right? We know this.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, this has been terrific. I have really enjoyed working with you on this study. And maybe with the next one, our 4-month research process, we can collapse it to 3 months, maybe?
Yeah, I hope so.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you left a like and if you shared the episode with your colleagues. Everything Thought Leadership is a video and podcast series from Buday TLP. It's for thought leaders and thought leadership professionals, the people who help experts get recognized as thought leaders. You can find out more about Buday Thought Leadership Partners at budaytlp.com.